Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Doherty.
And I'm Karyn Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next. Hello, and welcome back to the Grief Ladies podcast. I'm Kelly.
And I'm Karyn, and we are here once again in the holiday season. We're getting pretty close, I think, to things really probably officially starting. So we've been working through our grief framework. Today, we are talking about the letter I for interacting. Kelly, want to review the grief framework for us?
Sure. So our grief framework is based on the word grief. So we have grounding, rebuilding, interacting, evolving, and finding. And for those of you that are new to our show, these are not supposed to be really go in order. They're kind of fluid and they're always ongoing. At the same time, it's not like we accomplish grounding and then we're good. They're all basically foundations and things that we need to do to take care of ourselves when we're grieving and ways to be able to help yourself, because our goal really with this podcast is to be able to help you have some tools and resources as you navigate this really difficult journey of grief.
Yeah.
So like Karyn said, today we're talking about interacting, which I know is one of her favorite topics to talk about. And so, and probably a huge one for the holiday season. So would you like to share a little bit about what interacting means?
Yeah. And I was going to say, if you didn't say it, I'm like, oh, this is one of my favorites. So yeah, listen, it's about what comes up in pretty much every individual session I do, every group that I do. I kind of generally say the other people. That can mean the closest people in our lives, the people that we share a home with. It can be our immediate family, our extended family, coworkers, friends. I mean, really anybody in our lives, because we are not on an island as we are going through this. And as much as it's isolated and isolating, I should say, and lonely to go through this process, we also know that some of the bigger challenges and stresses, I believe, are caused by other people. And that can be sometimes our disappointment in maybe how people are responding or not responding. I think it can also be trying to navigate in our own family, as everybody has maybe their own individual grief, and then trying to support one another, but maybe not feeling really able to do that, or just being surprised and disappointed that like someone isn't being as responsive, or maybe they seem to be grieving too much or grieving too little, or they're not doing enough. I mean, there's just a lot that goes into this. So at other times of the year, maybe we can have a step back from everybody else, and maybe we can just take a breather, and maybe we can just choose to take a step back and get ourselves that chance to sort of have a little bit of quiet and solitude. But the holidays changes everything.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They are a test. I feel
Right.
like,
Yeah, that's
right?
a good way to put it. Yeah.
And how do we navigate when we don't want to see so and so because they have sucked,
Yeah.
and they haven't reached out to us and they've let us down and they said some of the stupid cliched responses that haven't been helpful. But now you're going to be forced to be with them in a room.
Yeah.
And how do you navigate that? And also, how do you navigate all these social interactions and obligations that really can feel quite overwhelming to people? And maybe this is the first time you're going to see some of these people since your loss.
Yeah.
And as I say, you're going to maybe either get the puppy dog look, or, the deer in the headlights look, like, oh gosh, what do I say to you, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's really hard, and it's we can be afraid that people are going to ask us a lot of questions, or we can be afraid that nobody's going to talk about it or our person at all. Both of those things can be really hard. I think it also puts us in a time where there's sort of an idea of like this forced merriment, like it's the holidays. It's a good excuse to just stop thinking about your grief for a while and to just be happy. Or maybe we find ourselves in conversations with people and they're talking about stuff that's just not important to us right now. And maybe you just feel like, I don't care, about people are talking about their travel plans, or, the gifts and everything else. And it's just that thing that feels like a really big disconnect. I think at times. So anyway, we I think because we like this topic, we could probably go on a lot about it. I know I could. But we do have a couple of questions here that we're going to be addressing. So the first is, how do I balance my need for solitude with social obligation? So that's one of the things we're going to be exploring because that comes up a lot.
Yeah, and one of my, I think, favorite topics, because I do love working with grieving children, is how do I still make the holiday special for my children when they have experienced loss? And what does that look like? And how do you navigate that? And also while also honoring your own grief.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because again, we don't get to just focus on ourselves. And that's maybe part of what the holidays really kind of emphasizes is normally it's supposed to be about giving and about togetherness and all of that. And it's a tough thing for a griever. And the last one that I think, could really come up for a lot of people too is holiday cards. How do I handle those? The sending of them, the receiving of them. Do I want to open the cards? Do I want to look at what people are sending, whether it's their happy updates, or did they write my loved one's name, or did they just leave my loved one's name off the card, and is that going to be hard to see, and am I going to participate in doing all of this? It's like you can see why it's so exhausting. There's just so much to have to be thinking about. So we're going to explore all of those things and hopefully give you some insights on what would help, what wouldn't, through all of this, trying to just give you some steps and some things that can help along the way.
Yeah, and it's about finding that balance and honoring both your needs and your connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we'll be back after with some more tips.
And we are in the thick of the holiday season, so we are continuing with our holiday questions. We know how difficult the holidays can be for people who are grieving. And especially if this is your first holiday season, you may be asking yourself a lot of questions about how to navigate this. And so today's question, I think, is a really good one. And I'll ask Karen is, how do I balance my need for solitude with social obligations?
Yeah. And this is definitely, I mean, a holiday question for sure, only because there's more social obligations probably, but this could certainly be something that you think about year round. I think one thing that surprises people is how much a grieving person does need that quiet and needs that time. I don't know if it's because there's so much going on in your head when you're grieving that being around a lot of people can become stressful, overstimulating, like it just feels like entirely too much. It's like noise, literally and figuratively, I think. So people do need that solitude. And it's strange because, like, let's say you lost the person that you share your house with, then, there is that quiet, maybe some of that loneliness. And yet, being pulled in to a bunch of group things doesn't feel right either. I think where this gets tricky and hard sometimes is not in every case, of course, but I know that the people that I speak to who have lost a spouse and their adult children will really be trying to yank them out of the house. Like, come on, let's get you to do this. Let's get you moving. Let's get you out. And while, some of that distraction can certainly be helpful and healthy, it can feel like too much for a person. So, in terms of balancing it, I think one, recognizing how you're going to need to be your own advocate. We talk about being like our own health advocate, like when we go to the doctor and things like that. Well, we sort of have to be our own peace advocate for ourselves and for what are the things that I need. I do believe that grief is very instinctual. And so I think while we don't always know what we want, we do know what we don't want, and so it's okay to feel that way and to vocalize that and let people know. Because that's the thing. I think more than likely people around you are going to be trying to keep traditions going and keep you active. So it's going to be a matter of letting people know that no, I understand that it seems like it'd be good, for me to be out, but I actually just do a little bit better when it's quiet and when I just have a little bit time to rest. If there are obligations that can't be avoided, then I always say to people like, okay, if you're going to Thanksgiving or, Christmas Day, New Year's, whatever it may be, then absolutely the day after should be a pajama day. Or taking off from work, or don't load up, this person's in from out of town and we're going to go to a show, we're going to do all these other things. Like, it's just too much,
Yep.
So I think all of the obligations that you have to do need to be followed up with quiet. And other than that, just recognizing that, like, yeah, this is what you need right now. It's part of the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, even if maybe you're going to your adult children's house and you have to stay there because it's the holiday season,
Yeah.
maybe you kind of know, like, you give them the heads up, like, I might need to take some breaks. So can I go into this room? And I've even told other like clients that, like, even if you're just going to somebody's house for the day, be like, I want to come, but if I need to take a break, where would be a good place for me to go have a few
Yeah.
minutes by
Good
myself?
idea. Yeah.
And I think that it's okay to do that. It's okay to take those breaks in those social settings because there could be triggers, there could be things that, can be hard to see or hear, or you just don't want to be involved in that conversation.
Right.
And that's okay. So about making sure that you're taking that space and that time and you're not just going and hiding in the bathroom and crying. So I think it's always a better thing to kind of just have a plan in mind. And that also will help people. And if you're somewhere, you can always leave. You don't have to stay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, you can always change your mind 5 minutes before you leave. If you're like, no, I can't do it, it's okay to say no. No is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
And, just saying, this year, I just can't do it.
Right.
And I
Absolutely.
need that. I need
Unapologetically, you know?
Exactly. I need
Yeah.
that downtime. And, you and I have spoken about, that feeling you have after a lot of that the day after, right? That emotional hangover. And it can really hit you. And sometimes for people, I feel that the majority of my clients leading up to days like holidays and birthdays and anniversaries is usually harder than the actual day.
Mhm.
But then there's a good number of my clients that crash the day after these events.
Yeah. I say that to people a lot, and it's like, I think we both feel like we probably have to be careful making predictions of this is
Yes.
how it's gonna be, because it's so different for everybody, but here you and I are both saying the same thing, that it's like the lead up, the dread is terrible, the day of is like, "Okay, like that I got through it." Probably because it wasn't as bad as we thought it was gonna be, but then it's like a crash of all of that build up and then the letdown,
Yeah,
that comes, and I like the point that you said because we're talking about solitude. It doesn't just have to be in your own home. That's often why I tell people to drive themselves if they can, because even just having those moments in the car to kind of gather yourself or to allow you to have the freedom to go when you want, go late, leave early, or just to use that time to kind of regroup, I think can be really, really helpful. So maybe it's also about finding the solitude where you can get it.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So to sum up, how do I balance my need for solitude with social obligations?
Well, I think like we would say, Kelly, a lot of times there's just, communication and being an advocate for ourselves, for our grief, our needs, whatever that may be. Um, Changing the rules a little bit in terms of like how things normally go and finding solitude where we can and planning for not just the days themselves, but the days that follow and making sure that we are carving out time for that quiet that grieving people absolutely do need, and making sure your family understands that that's just part of your process right now, and that may not always be that way, but it's really important.
Are the holidays or harder days in grief weighing on you?
We get it. We've been supporting grieving people for decades, and we know how overwhelming it could feel.
That's why we've teamed up to launch Grief Ladies, a new space for practical, compassionate support after loss.
And you're invited to our free launch event on November 19th. You'll get a first look at our grief framework, our live talk on handling the harder days in grief, and a special take home guide just for live attendees.
Reserve your free spot today and join us on November 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern, and the link to register will be in the show notes.
We'd love to see you there. So, Kelly, this question is going to be for you. How do I still make the holiday special for my children after they have experienced a loss?
Yeah. So I think it's such a good question and so important because there's a lot of grieving children out there. And, as we know, as I probably have said in many other videos, we know that 1 in 12 children will have a parent or sibling die by the time they're 18 years old. So there's a lot of grieving kiddos out there. And even if it's not the first year, it may be the second or the third year, it still can be pretty impactful for them,
Mm.
and still definitely be impacting how they feel about the holidays. And what I've found from the majority of the kiddos that I've worked with over the years is they want the holidays to be as normal as natural, as normal as possible, right? They want to have the same traditions, they want to put up the tree, they want to have the same decorations out. And sometimes that's not always possible, right? Sometimes because of circumstances, financial changes, parents, surviving parents may be grieving as well, and they may have a hard time with being able to do those things for their children as well. So maybe asking for help, and then also, just thinking about what can you do for your children and what can't you, and be honest with your children. Like, no, I can't put the lights on the outside of the house this year. It's just something that I'm not able to do. I find that a lot of my families with like teenagers tend to want to go away for the first holiday
Hmm.
season, and they go to like amazing islands and tropical vacations, and they or cruises. A ton of my clients have gone on cruises at Christmas, and that's worked well for them. So I think it's really about a discussion that you have to have with your family is, we know that this is going to be difficult. What are the traditions that we want to keep? What are things we want to do different? Where do we want to go? Do we want to still go to grandma's house, or do we want to stay at home? So I think it's really varies on the family, and it's about communication and talking about it. And now, if they're really tiny, you might have to make that decision for them, right? And that is going to be, what do you think is going to be best for them, and what's going to be best for you as well. Sometimes, especially if it's a spouse that's died and you've got little kids, maybe in helping having somebody help come over, put together all the presents and the toys, right? All the things that you have to build, um, the night before, asking for some help with that. And these are times definitely where it's okay to ask for help. And then, but kids grieve, through their play. And they still want to have, especially if it's Christmas or Hanukkah, they still want to have this magical celebration that they're used to. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're not missing their loved one. It's just they grieve very differently than us.
Yeah.
And so it may not look the same.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you talk about the different age ranges and you talk about the teenagers. It sounds a lot more like how some adults choose to just do something that does not feel like the holiday at all, like as far away from the holiday as possible that they can get. And a lot of the adults that I work with kind of move in that direction if they're able, if they can. I imagine for the younger kids, maybe sometimes they just need those things that still feel familiar. Not to mention, Christmas is tends to be, very extra special for them with the toys and everything else. So it seems like if you're able to do it, getting it with the help, but it's hard because, you're talking about a person who is also grieving. If there's been a child loss or if there's been the loss of a spouse or even a grandparent or whatever it may be, the person who's caring for the child is also grieving themselves. So I imagine part of it too is if you do have to really immerse yourself in some things that you don't feel up to, also taking some time for yourself removed from all of that as you're able, maybe getting a little bit of extra support or, just trying to not be too immersed in other places. Like maybe if there's a holiday party or things like that, like I've hit my limit. There's only so much holiday stuff I'm going to be able to do. Yeah.
I think it comes down to the boundaries of what you can do, right?
Right.
And but then also checking in with your kids and seeing what they want and seeing if you can come up with a decision as a family. And I've had some families, they do go away that first Christmas, or, and then the next year they're like, no, I want to be back at home. I want to put the tree up again, or. And so I really think it's just, you have to take it year by year.
Yeah.
You can't say this is the way it's always going to be, because you don't know. You may say you
Absolutely.
don't want to do any of the traditions this year, and then next year you want to bring them all back.
Right. And that's the best outlook, I think, in approach to it is because then you don't feel like I think sometimes people worry that like traditions are these things that have to remain unbroken and that if they break that you can never return to them, and so it's like I'm not just making a decision for this year, I'm making a decision for all year. And it's like, no, you're not. It really is just this year, regardless of whether you're in the first or third or whatever it may be. And you have to really kind of take it year by year with where you're at. So
Definitely.
yeah. Okay, Kelly. So just to summarize the question, how do I still make the holiday special for my children after they've experienced a loss? What would you say?
Well, I think it varies per family, and you need to maybe sit down as a family and kind of talk about what they want their holiday season to look like. What is maybe the traditions they want to keep? Where do they want to go? What do they want to change? And then, depending, obviously, the adults have to be the ones to make the decisions, the caregivers. And so sometimes they're going to be able to fulfill those wishes, and sometimes they might not be able to, and that's okay. And sometimes, each year is going to look different. So just kind of taking it year by year and saying, okay, this year we're doing this doesn't mean you're always going to do that. You can bring back some traditions or you can change traditions. And just remembering that children grieve very differently than adults, and they do grieve through their play, and they still want the magic of the holiday season. So to just be mindful of that. And even though you may be grieving and not really wanting to participate, you might have to step out of your comfort zone to be able to do that for your kids. And then also, you might need to ask for some help with
Yeah.
things, and it's okay to ask for help. And so today's question is for Karyn, and it is, how do I handle holiday cards, both sending and receiving?
Yeah, we talked about this, and I think this is a good question because it's probably not something people think about until, like, the moment that they're either sitting down to write their cards or that first card comes in the mail. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I've got this to think about too." People are very focused on decorations, very focused on the get-togethers, but these are like those little things that do have a lot of tradition attached to them for some, but all of a sudden can feel very, very different. So, we talked about the sending and the receiving. So, I guess to talk about the sending first, couple of things. One, you don't have to send them this year. That's, entirely up to you whether you feel up to sitting down and doing that. I would imagine a lot of people don't. I know when I lost my stepdad, that first year I didn't do any cards. Just didn't do it. I wasn't in the spirit of it. I wasn't in the mindset of it. Just didn't feel. And frankly, I've kind of scaled back ever since then. It's interesting how things sort of change, and they can sort of stay that way. But so you don't have to do it. Maybe if you are doing it, you do it on a smaller scale. Or even if you're just giving a card that's like accompanying a gift, you kind of wonder how to do that. I know another part of this is how to sign the card. Like, let's say you're talking about, in a couple, and again, like, my mom has chosen to continue to put my stepdad's name on the cards. I love it. I really like it. It's A-okay with me. How the rest of my family feels about it, I'm not sure, but I think it's kinda neat. And actually, what's he was a painter at the end of his life, and he actually made little cards, so the cards we get are his paintings.
Oh, I
So
love
I
that.
know, I
Oh,
know. I keep
our
all of them.
continuing bonds, right?
Exactly, exactly. So it's like a nice, really special thing, to have. So there's that part of it that just happens to be sort of personal, to our family that we're able to do it that way. But it's that very, like, what do you want to do? And you can go out and buy a pack of cards, sit down and see if you can get through them or not. They don't have to have the same messages that you're used to about happy, happy, happy. It could just be very calm, maybe kind of blank inside where you just, send someone love, whatever it may be. Um, I guess the other part of this is the receiving of cards, and people will also maybe wonder how to address the cards, and having them come in without your loved one's name could be very difficult and very triggering. You may decide that you don't really want to open the cards, and that's okay too. You can sort of put them aside. I know people even do that sometimes in the midst of, memorial services and things like that. They just don't feel up to doing that. So I suppose we give this advice a lot, but it is very personal. And I guess it's just a matter of knowing that you don't have to follow the same rules of what you've always done. People either understand or they don't, but there just may be things that you're just not up to.
Well, and I love what we talked about, prior to us recording, kind of about, how do we handle sending cards to people that we know that are grieving?
Mhm.
And, you said you usually choose like a peace card, right? And one that's maybe not so like holly jolly, right? Because the reality is the holidays are difficult for a lot of people, not just grieving people. And there's family estrangement. There's all types of grief that really can come up from the holidays. And sometimes the holidays can be some triggering reminders of things. And so I do think, a more basic, like simple card that has a peace message or something like that probably is a better thing to send out overall to people
Right.
because you don't know. how people are going to respond. And I know for me, I've always like been really careful when I know somebody's grieving not to send like a happy Merry Christmas, best year ever, because I know for them going into the new year probably is hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be the first year on the calendar that their loved one wasn't a part of, and how hard that can be. And I remember a few years ago, I made one because I couldn't find any cards that I felt were like
Oh, it's
appropriate
nice.
for grief. And I like made one on Canva and printed it. And, because I wanted just like a simple winter scene. I didn't want some like, really happy scene because I know it probably wasn't an easy holiday season for that
Right.
family.
Yeah.
And there's some people out there, some other grief counselors we know that have holiday cards that you can buy, and I think they're nice. Just have a peaceful holiday. I hope your holiday is gentle. Saying things like that if you're sending it out can be nice. So I do think this video could be people that could be benefit people who know grieving individuals what to do,
Yeah.
but also handling those cards. It's hard to sometimes maybe get those updates. I don't know if any of your family members do these where they do the long letter and they talk about all the amazing things their family members did.
Yeah.
And then you're grieving and you're like, well, this is awful.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
I'm
I
not
didn't
doing
get
any of that.
all of this year. And then one of my clients, she actually, a family member, like a distant family member, that was their opening paragraph was about her husband dying.
Okay. Different
And
approach.
she was so triggered by that.
Yeah.
And, like, also upset because she's I think I should have had some warning that they were gonna talk about my family in their card, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I'm like, "Well, I think they were just wanting to acknowledge and kind of, acknowledge your grief and that they're missing them just like you are," and, those things can definitely be triggering, so I think you have to think, is sending the coming back to the simple question, which we've talked about in many videos, is this gonna help or hurt?
Hmm. Yeah.
Is sending out cards gonna help or hurt? Or opening the cards gonna help or hurt?
Yeah. That's
Maybe
very
you
true.
put maybe you put them to the side and you wait until you feel like you're in a good spot to be able to open them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. If nothing else, usually with the cards, you can see who they came from and you get the idea. You know?
Exactly. You know which one's gonna have the family letter and which
Yeah.
one.
Right. And it's like, all right, this person was thinking of me, this person, that's lovely. Like maybe that's as much as I need to know is that who was reaching out in general. Do you think any of this also sort of translates in, I guess speaking to the people who know grieving people, or if we're able to express to others what would be helpful to us, but the way we text or the way we greet each other. So, like, I've been doing a lot of calls this week with people that I won't talk to now until after the holiday, and so I find myself being mindful of that and telling them I hope they have a restful holiday, a peaceful holiday. Like, do you think that this can kind of translate in how we text or talk to each other too?
Yeah, I think it should, right? I
Yeah.
think, if we had a more grief literate society, we'd be more mindful of the things that we're saying to people that we know are grieving. I mean, I do the same thing. Mine's always like, I hope that Thanksgiving is gentle and calm and peaceful for you, and because like we've talked about, Thanksgiving can trigger all sorts of emotions, right? And the questions of how do you feel gratitude and so I think it's just about being mindful about how we do say these things like, "Oh, can't hope you have a happy new year, the best yet." And like one of my clients was like, "My daughter is not going to live in that year. So how is that going to be the best year?" Or even saying something like, "I hope next year's better for you."
Mm,
I've heard a lot of that in
yeah.
some of the cards, and the reality is their grief is gonna follow them into the new year. It's not necessarily gonna be any easier.
Yeah. That's so true. That's so true. And, as we've talked about, I think there's a lot of good intention behind it or people just not really knowing any better. But all of this, it's interesting, even though we're talking about like cards and kind of in the written form, which anymore is probably the least way that we communicate with people, but it's all still about communication, how we are sending it, how we are receiving it, what we're putting out there, and then what we're getting back. So, the rules aren't terribly different. It's just this very specific thing that, and let's face it, we're talking about holiday cards, but it probably is the case for birthday cards and things like that too, that people are, reminded of also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so to sum up, the question, Karen, what would you say to people are how do you handle holiday cards, both receiving and sending?
Well, I guess again, just the fact that it's going to be a very personal decision. Do you have the energy to do it? Number one, to sit down with your list. Do you modify that list and only do it to people that you're closest to? Do you do it at all with the sending? How do you sign it? If you lost a spouse, what feels right? You may find you write it out, like, I don't like that, either with or without, and you do another one. This is going to be a lot of trial and error, especially if it's your first year. In terms of receiving, it's your choice whether you want to open those or not, and what you do with the cards themselves. Like, it's just, it's what we say. It's you kind of have to feel it along and see how you do as it comes.
Well, those are really important questions that our listeners had about navigating, interacting during the holidays. And like we end every show, we end with an actionable step because we do believe there are things that can help you on your grief journey, even during the holidays when it feels really maybe difficult. And so we're sticking with our theme of giving gifts to ourselves. And so, Karen, what is our actionable step for this week with interacting?
Well, yeah, like you said, the gift you give yourself. And that could be allowing solitude when you need it. It can be trying to create a simple tradition. We kind of talked about trying to keep this still a special day for children, which is a hard thing. And as far as the holiday cards, I mean, it's something that you really have to listen to yourself about. The year that I lost my stepdad, I had always been doing cards up until that point, and when I sat down to do it, I just knew I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. It didn't feel right. I just wasn't in that mindset. And so that was a permission thing that I gave myself that year, was to not do it. And I'll be honest, in years that follows, I kind of scaled down. I did it a little bit differently. So that's some of the things that, listening to your instincts, and don't get too caught up with what you've always done or what you feel like you should do, and give yourself that permission along the way. I think that's what can help.
Yes, great advice. So, good things to kind of think about and explore over the next week. And then join us next week where we are moving into our next trail marker, which is evolving. And so, that is how do we deal with some of the complicated feelings, the difficult feelings that may show up? And then, how do we navigate that in at the same time as dealing with the holidays? So, stay tuned. We will see you next week. Take care.
Yep. See you then.
Thanks for joining us on the Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.